At a time when the Great Depression had hit people hard all over the United States, another tragedy was going on. A woman named Georgia Tann was getting tons of money by illegally placing children for adoption. This tragedy went on for over 25 years and ended up ripping thousands of families apart. Most of the children Tann stole would never see their birth parents again. The long-term significance of Georgia Tann's actions was that adoption laws were changed for the worse all over the United States. Georgia Tann was raised in Hickory, Mississippi, and was a very ambitious woman from the start. Georgia Tann had set her hopes on a career in law, but her father deemed it too masculine. Her father, Judge George Tann, wanted her to become a concert pianist. She told a friend in 1935, "I was glued on a piano stool at 5, and I didn't entirely get away from a piano until I was grown." When she was older, not having been allowed to practice law, she studied music and taught for a short period of time. In her hometown of Hickory, Tann had had some prior experience with social work, wanting to visit the local poor instead of going to local parties and dances. Her father, Judge Tann, often was given the responsibility of placing children in homes who were wards of the state. It is possible that Georgia Tann's own brother, Rob Roy Tann, was one of the wards and then was adopted by the Tann family. Around 1906, when she was just 15 years old, she arranged her first adoption. In 1916, she began placing children in homes for the Mississippi Children's Home Finding Society. She would then later work for the Tennessee Children's Home Society and turn it into the corrupt kidnapping machine it would be for over 25 years. From 1924 to 1950, a tragedy was going on. Tann was making a fortune by selling children from poor families and often poor, uneducated young mothers to wealthier families. This letter is from Georgia Tann to a possible adoptive parent. It says, "Dear Mrs. Jordan, how would you like to do this? Take Mildred just as you did James and let her visit with you for a while. Then, if you are pleased with her and the child is satisfied to stay with you permanently, adopt her also. Mrs. Miller is willing to have you do this. Then, if she isn't satisfied, Mrs. Miller will take her back. It seems too bad for the brother and sister not to be together if they really want to be. Kindly let us hear from you soon. Yours truly, Georgia Tann." She would take these children from almost anywhere, from the street, from hospitals, porches, prisons, and more. Some of the children in the Tennessee Children's Home Society died from neglect, abuse, and starvation. She might have first placed children in adoptive homes out of concern and kindness for the birth child, having encountered an infant in her youth that had been drugged and found in a shack under a pile of rags. The mother had been arrested because she was addicted to morphine. Tann believed that poor people were incapable of proper parenting and that she was saving them by stealing them and placing the children for adoption. She was arrogant, condescending, confident, and full of a need for power. She also found a way, through social work and adoption, to defy her father. These things, among other motivations, were the main reasons Tann started kidnapping and selling children. One reason Tann got away with this for as long as she did was because of her connections. She had accomplices almost anywhere. They could be politicians, judges, attorneys, doctors, nurses, social workers, really anywhere where people needed the money because of the impact of the Great Depression. Two of her most famous accomplices were boss E.H. Crump and Judge Camille Kelly. Crump was the mayor of Memphis, Tennessee, the city where Tann's headquarters were, from 1910 to 1915, and also for a short period of time in 1940. He was a very influential political leader in the city for the first half of the 20th century. He protected Tann from investigations and protests, and Tann gave him loads of money in return. Judge Kelly and Tann had a business agreement. When a child custody case was brought before the court, Judge Kelly would automatically grant full guardianship to the orphanage, which was the Tennessee Children's Home Society.
I don't know if the average citizen knew this, but they were not licensed to place children for adoption. So they should not have placed any children and they were placing children for adoption for a long time, and they shouldn't have been, but they were allowed to because nothing she did was legal, but because of her connection to the political boss, she was allowed to do it.
The scandal was finally revealed in 1950 when Tennessee Governor Gordon Browning ordered an investigation after he heard about the abused children and that the mortality rates were up for the children who were up for adoption. Neither Tann nor any of her accomplices were ever punished for their crimes because of their convenient deaths before the findings of the investigation were released and they could be put on trial. The short-term impact of Tann's actions was that thousands of families were torn apart. Older children were taken from streets, playgrounds, and even their own homes and told that their parents had died. Young mothers who Tann had a hold on in hospitals, mental facilities, and prisons were told that their newborn child was stillborn. She also lied to families and just outright stole children from other families and other mothers. She also often tricked young single mothers into signing papers that would surrender their child or children to the Genesee Children's Home Society.
6 children, ages 3 to 10, were a lot to care for, and the faltering Grace Gribble had reached out yet again to the Memphis Family Welfare Agency. The 2 visitors sat there in her front room, Mrs. Sims, who Grace knew, and Mrs. Rose, who she did not. And Mrs. Rose began to ask questions and fill in the blanks in her paperwork. It was an application for free medical aid from the Widow's Assistance Program, Miss Sims said, and she presented the pages for Grace to sign. Surely buoyed by this rare bit of good news, Grace Gribble eagerly signed all 6 pages. And then Mrs. Rose folded the papers, placed them neatly in her pocket, and said to Grace Gribble, quite perfunctorily as you might if ordering from an unimpressive menu, "I'll take the 3 youngest children now." Mrs. Rose worked for the infamous Georgia Tann. In 6 signatures, she had just surrendered all 6 of her precious children for adoption. Mrs. Rose had 4-year-old Kirby in her arms. He had blue eyes, red hair, and was crying inconsolably. And she said to Grace Gribble, as if it were a silver lining of some kind, "We have an order for a boy of this age and type."
Tann managed to persuade most of the U.S. that it was better for mothers who were pregnant but unmarried to give their child up. The most remarkable thing about this was that, at the time, laws were enforced to make single mothers want to keep their child so that they weren't placed in orphanages. Tann managed to convince people all over that it was better for the child to be given up for adoption rather than to live with the fact that they were illegitimate. By the time World War II came along, the frequency of single mother pregnancies was up. By the time Tann died, most white single mothers in maternity homes were surrendering their newborn babies. The adoption market was steady, and for parents who were infertile, adoption seemed like a valid choice. The long-term impact of Tann's actions were that adoption laws were changed for the worse and that adoption was popularized in the United States. Georgia Tann touches us even today because of her method of covering up her crimes that eventually every state adopted. Tann would alter adoptees' birth certificates to make it look like the adoptive parents were the real parents and to change the adoptee's name and other aspects of their identities. This, she said, was protecting the child of their illegitimacy. Legislators in the United States believed this and started to also alter adoptees' birth certificates. Currently, only 30 out of 50 states have changed those laws. However, the laws on how much of your birth information you can access if you are adopted vary state to state. In all states, however, adoptees cannot access their actual physical birth certificate. Most states have allowed adoptees to access family medical history and other information for medical purposes.
And most adoptees want their records. The primary reason initially is for their health information.
In just over 25 years, Georgia Tann managed to illegally place 5,000 children for adoption. Many of her children were abused and died in her care, or were adopted and then abused and died in the care of their new adoptive parents. She managed to commercialize, corrupt, and popularize adoption, all at the same time. If it had not been for this woman, adoption as we know it today would not have been the same. She turned something that had been looked down on into something that was commercialized, but also a valid option for parents who were unable to conceive. Her adoption practices were not ethical, and her methods were corrupt. She destroyed thousands of lives, some of which were people she didn't directly touch. But some fraction of her children probably did have a better life in their new adoptive home. While it may have been a triumph for her, a way to deceive her father and to get the power she always wanted, it was a tragedy for the rest of the thousands of people she robbed. However, it was also a triumph for adoption. Tann popularized it so that more people did start adopting children. While popularizing adoption did have its own tragedies, such as birth records being closed to adoptees, many triumphs are happening today all over the United States where adoptees are getting more access to their birth records. Georgia Tann's actions certainly have affected and are still affecting thousands of people all across the United States.